What's the one thing you'd say to your younger self before your first betrayal?
When my sister's message came in, the one where she said dinner was just for the successful ones and that I should not take it personally because it was a vibe thing, I held the phone in my hand and felt that old, familiar not settle right under my ribs. Not because the words were new or creative or even surprising, but because she finally said the quiet part out loud and put it in writing, like a label she wanted me to carry through the door if I ever tried to show up. I typed 3 different replies that sounded reasonable and adult and calm, none of which I sent, because I knew she would twist every sentence into proof that I was sensitive or dramatic or making everything about me. And I have learned that when someone is committed to misunderstanding you, the most generous thing you can do for your own sanity is to stop handing them tools. I set the phone down, ordered takeout from a place that does not ask complicated questions, and told myself I would just eat and shut my laptop and put on something mindless. Yet before the food even arrived, I had already opened my work window and pulled up 3 dashboards, because if I am being honest, that text did not just sting. It flipped a switch that has been living in me since high school. The one that hums every time I am measured by the wrong ruler. I could hear my mother in the background of that message, that warm, polished tone she uses when she wants to pretend she is neutral, telling me there are seasons and that I should celebrate other people even when my own life is quiet. Which sounds wise until you notice how the seasons in our family always seem to begin and end on my sister's schedule. I sat at my small kitchen table, opened the container of noodles, and decided I would not chase anyone for a chair tonight. Not at a restaurant, not in a group chat, and definitely not at a table where success is defined like a party trick. While the food cooled, I made a decision that felt small and mean for about 30 seconds and then felt perfectly balanced, because it was not revenge so much as the kind of boundary you draw with a Sharpie after trying pencil for too long. Years ago, when my sister's startup idea was burning cash and she could not afford the tools she needed to keep her clients, I put my card down for 3 subscriptions and told her she could pay me back when things settled. Things never settled, she never paid. And every month the charges came through like a little invoice from the past. I logged into each account and reassigned the seats to my team where they would actually be used. Then I removed her access completely and sent myself the confirmation emails, not with fireworks, not with a speech. Just with a quiet exhale that felt like I had finally stopped letting my kindness be used as collateral. Since I was already tidying, I opened the family streaming profile I have paid for since graduate school and took my name off the master account, then moved every auto payment connected to my card into a folder named Close the Leak, because if I am going to own my life, then I am going to own my money too, and if that feels cold to them, they can warm themselves at the glow of their group dinner. The phone buzzed a few times with messages from cousins who learned early that gossip is a form of currency in our family, little nudges that asked if I was coming, if I was mad, if I could just be cool for one night and not make waves. And I answered each one with a single line that said I was busy tonight and wished them a good time, because I refuse to perform humility for people who only clap when I am quiet. I ate my noodles, reread my sister's text until the words lost their teeth, and then opened the deck I have been building, the one that has kept me up for months and forced me to grow a spine where I used to place apologies. The slides were simple and clean, the numbers were solid, and the timing was delicate in a way that would make most people nervous, yet I felt steady, not because I needed to prove anything to them, but because something in me has shifted from please let me in to watch me build my own door. Before I shut the laptop to take a quick shower and reset my head, I changed a meeting title on my calendar from generic late call to a phrase that made me smile in a way that did not reach my face, something my sister would roll her eyes at if she ever saw it. Which she will not, because she has never cared to ask, and that is fine with me. I put my phone on Do Not Disturb for the night, not as a dramatic gesture, but as a practical one, because I did not want to hear the little pings from the family group while I was doing something that actually mattered. And I taped her message to the corner of my mind like a sticky note that reads, "Do not waste your breath." When I finally lay back on the couch, I pictured the long table where they were practicing their version of success, the performance, the jokes that land when everyone agrees on the script, and I realized I did not envy a single seat. Because I am done asking to be measured by people who use a bent ruler and call it tradition. I will not pretend it did not hurt. It did, and I felt that ache the way you feel a bruise when you bump it again. But right under the ache there was a steady hum that sounded a lot like momentum, the kind that does not need applause to keep moving. I let them have their dinner, their photos, their captions that always read like an advertisement for a life I am supposed to want, and I let myself have something else, which was the quiet satisfaction of closing leaks, reclaiming my time, and preparing for a call that would not just change my week, but would change the way my last name lands in certain rooms. They can keep their definition of success, and they can keep their guest list too, because tonight I have my own table, my own seat, and a countdown clock that is not interested in anyone's permission. If I rewind far enough, I can still hear the way my family talked about success, as if it were a club with a velvet rope and a bouncer who looked suspiciously like my sister, and I can see how I kept trying to present the right proof of entry. The grades and the internships and the patient explanations about what I was building, only to watch the rope drop for her without a question while I stood there holding a stack of receipts for things nobody wanted to count, which is why that message about dinner did not land in a vacuum but fell into a history where every milestone of mine had to show up with a translator and a notarized letter just to be acknowledged. I learned early that in our house applause arrived on a schedule that matched her calendar, and if I achieved something on the wrong week or in the wrong language, then I was told to be gracious and wait my turn, which somehow meant sitting quietly while other people told my story back to me in a way that made them the hero, and if I pushed back, I was labeled difficult or dramatic or ungrateful, so I stopped asking for applause and started keeping records instead, not because I planned to weaponize them, but because facts have a way of holding you together when people keep insisting your memory is defective. I looked at those records after I finished clearing the subscriptions and the streaming profile, and it was almost funny in a way that made my chest tight, because there it was in a clean list. The favors and the quiet loans and the earnest pep talks that I had been told meant nothing because they happened behind the scenes. And there were the notes about being asked to co-sign a lease, as if my credit were a family resource and not the result of years of paying bills on time while being told I was unserious. And there were the emails where I sent calendar templates and client scripts that reappeared in my sister's deck 2 weeks later with her logo on it and a comment that said she had always been a natural at systems. I opened the folder labeled Paper Trail, pulled up the agreement I had drafted when she first asked me to guarantee that lease, and felt a clean kind of calm move through me, because the truth is I could sit here forever waiting for someone to admit what they took, or I could make it unnecessary for them to keep taking, and on a night when I had already been informed that I lacked the right kind of shine, practicality felt like dignity disguised as housekeeping. So I wrote a short and relentlessly polite letter to her landlord withdrawing my consent to remain as guarantor at the next renewal date and copied my sister so nobody could pretend to be surprised later. And then I called the utility company and removed my card from the file with the same calm voice I use when I am negotiating something that matters, and afterward I drafted a message to the family group that said, in one long sentence that offered no edges to grab, that I would not be available for loans, co-signs, or emergency subscriptions going forward, and that any standing arrangements needed to be replaced within 2 weeks, and that I wished everyone a wonderful season of whatever they were celebrating this month. I attached a tidy invoice to a separate email for the unpaid subscriptions from years ago, not because I needed the money, but because I needed the ledger to show something other than silence. And I added a note at the bottom that said I was happy to waive the total if I received, in writing, a simple acknowledgement of the debt and a sentence that read, "I am sorry for taking you for granted," which to some people might sound petty, yet to me sounded like a fair exchange between adults who want to close a chapter without pretending it never happened. While I sent those messages, I kept the work window open in the corner of my screen, and the changing numbers steadied me more than any pep talk ever could, because every update pulled the curtain back a little further on what was about to happen. The council thread moving steadily through final language, the wire instructions being formatted in a way that made my hands feel too warm, the producer from a business network leaving a voicemail with a friendly voice that asked if I could confirm I was comfortable going on air to discuss a transaction that would be of interest to their viewers, and I realized that for once I did not feel the urge to tell anyone in my family first, not because I wanted to blindside them, but because I wanted to experience one important thing without narrating it for people who only listen when the room is already applauding. My phone kept buzzing with photos from the dinner, the clinking glasses, and the captions about earning your seat and the inside jokes I was not supposed to understand, and I let them pile up unanswered while I set a new rule on my phone that sent anything from the family group to a folder named later, and I gave a separate custom tone to the producer and to legal and to my co-founder. Because tonight I would only answer calls that respected my time. The small revenge of the night did not look like fireworks or public speeches. It looked like a credit pull I initiated on my own file to freeze access so nobody could leverage my name again. It looked like a neat PDF that traveled across a landlord's desk and made the future less sticky for me. It looked like a bill with a gentle condition that asked for a sentence nobody in my family had ever said out loud. And as I clicked through each step, I felt something unclench that had been tight for years. Not victory exactly, but a kind of private realignment that said, I am not waiting for you to weigh me anymore. When I finally closed the folders and rinsed my plate, the voicemail icon blinked again. And this time it was not just the producer, but the segment editor confirming a time block and asking if I would mind staying on after the close in case the anchor wanted to follow up. And I listened to the message twice, smiled without showing teeth, and set a reminder to send over a clean background line before the mic check, while across town my sister refreshed a feed that had not yet told her anything at all about what seat I was about to take. The producer's number lit up exactly when she said it would, and her voice came through steady and practical as she walked me through timing, through the order of questions, through the reminder that if the anchor interrupted it was not rudeness, but the rhythm of live television. And while she spoke, I watched our counsel confirm the last red lines in the side chat, and I felt the strange quiet that sometimes arrives right before a storm. Not fear and not excitement exactly, but the sense that the ground has already moved and you are simply catching up to where your own feet have landed, which is a feeling I have learned to trust more than any pep talk because it does not need an audience to exist. When the tech check finished and the delay was calibrated and I could hear the heartbeat of the control room in the brief pockets of silence, the anchor's voice came on with that smooth cadence people recognize in airports and waiting rooms. She said my name and my title, and she said we were closing a transaction valued at $120 million with commitments across multiple jurisdictions. And she asked me to explain how a team my size managed to move a deal this large in a market that has been unforgiving to anyone who does not arrive with the right last name or a cheer squad of familiar faces. So I took one breath and did what I came to do, which was tell the truth in a way that was clean and useful. I said we moved deliberately and fast because we did not have the luxury of either recklessness or ego, that we anchored valuation on defensible cash flows and insisted on a retention pool before we even stepped into diligence, because people are not assets you reconcile at the end of a quarter, that we gave the counterparty clarity instead of theater, and they repaid that respect with speed, and that the only way you close something like this without burning everyone out is by deciding early. That credit will be shared like oxygen and not doled out like candy at a party, and while I spoke I could feel the old voice in my head that used to ask if I sounded too assertive or not grateful enough. And I noticed how quiet that voice had become since I stopped auditioning for rooms that preferred me soft and apologetic. The anchor asked how long we had been building toward this night and whether it felt like an overnight success, and I said that nothing about this was overnight, that it took years of patience and 1,000 rejections and 1,000 tiny pivots that would bore anyone looking for a shiny headline. That in the end the boring discipline is what made it possible to sit here and talk about a number that sounds like a trumpet blast when you say it out loud, and that the people who taught me to tolerate boredom and keep moving would probably never call themselves mentors because they were too busy actually working. When she asked about terms, I did not flinch. I laid out what we won without gloating and what we gave without apologizing. I said we protected the core. We refused a structure that tried to push risk back onto the workers who built the product. We carved out a vendor repayment waterfall because honoring commitments is not optional just because you finally got leverage, and we accepted a narrower earnout because we preferred certainty to a story that looks prettier on paper, and somewhere in the middle of that answer the producer dropped a note in my ear that said we had time for one more and to use it well, which I heard not as pressure, but as permission to do the thing I had decided I would do if the moment felt right. The anchor smiled with her voice and invited me to speak to the people who were watching who might not see themselves in deals like this, and I said I would like to announce something I have been keeping quiet until the documents were final, that a portion of my carry and a portion of our fees would fund a small but real grant program for women who were told to wait their turn or to get a real job or to be supportive from the sidelines, that the program would not require a pedigree or a reference from someone important, that it would require only a working plan and evidence of grit and a promise to pay it forward, and that we were calling it the Build Your Own Table Fund because some of us got tired of proving we deserve a chair at someone else's dinner. The anchor repeated the name as if tasting it and said it landed. She asked where people could find details. I gave a simple address and promised the application would be live by Monday. And then we were out of time and the music swelled and the screen went to another headline and the producer came back to say I had been clear and grounded and that the segment would replay across the late block because the wire had picked up our close faster than she expected. And only then did I glance at my phone and see the stack of missed calls that had accumulated during the last half hour. The tidy cluster from counsel and banking and my co-founder, and then a different color of notification that told me the group chat had awakened and that cousins who never text at night were suddenly very interested in whether I was awake. I did not touch any of those messages. I answered counsel and I answered my co-founder, and I sent the editor the clean background line I had promised, and when the producer asked if I wanted to add anything before the replay cycle, I said I wanted one sentence on screen under my name for the late reruns that read "We built this by telling the truth and keeping our word." Because I knew exactly who would see that sentence without looking for it and exactly how it would sound when it collided with the message my sister had sent earlier. And as a small act of revenge that did not require a single raised voice, I set my voicemail to a calm greeting that said I was unavailable tonight, and that any invitations to dinner should be sent in writing to my office where my team would consider them in due course, after which I turned the ringer off completely and let the replay carry the news to every table that thought I did not belong. By the time the segment had finished its third replay and the ticker rolled my name across the bottom line of the late block, my phone was lit up like a storefront sign, and although I had silenced the sound earlier, the constant vibration against the countertop made it impossible to ignore, so I walked over and saw exactly what I had expected, which was a neat column of missed calls from my parents, my sister, and then the cousins who rarely reached out unless there was gossip to exchange. Each call spaced by only a few minutes, like a sequence of people nudging each other to try next, as if persistence could disguise the fact that not one of them had cared to invite me to their dinner just a few hours earlier. The irony landed with almost mathematical precision, because while they had been clinking glasses over some curated definition of success that fit neatly around my sister's life, they had somehow missed the moment where the word success was attached to my face on a national broadcast, and now, scrambling in the dark, they wanted immediate access, as though nothing at all had happened. I let the screen dim and then light up again as new calls came in, and for the first time I did not feel the pull to explain myself or to answer out of habit, because what exactly would I say to people who were already rehearsing lines in their heads? Lines that would paint this as a misunderstanding or a joke gone too far or even a compliment wrapped in rough edges, when the truth was that they had excluded me deliberately, repeatedly, and with a kind of smug satisfaction that only comes from believing you have the right to define someone else's worth. I had lived under that scale for so many years that it had almost become invisible, and yet seeing my name on Bloomberg tonight had reset something in me, reminding me that scales are designed, not inherited, and if theirs could not weigh me accurately, then it had no business measuring me at all. Messages started to appear in clusters. My mother's first one said she was proud and that she had always known I would do something special, which rang hollow because I can still hear her telling me 2 years ago that it might be time to put aside my projects and get a steady job. Maybe at the hospital where a family friend could help me secure a desk position. My father's message was shorter but sharper, saying that of course he supported me and that he had never doubted me, though I could pull up emails with his name on them advising me to stop throwing away my savings and invest in real estate instead of chasing something he called a fantasy. My sister's message came last and was dressed in sarcasm disguised as casual praise, saying she had just seen my face pop up on her feed and that I had really pulled one out of the hat, which was the kind of minimizing phrase she always used when she did not know how to reconcile her own self-image with something I had achieved. I did not answer any of them. Instead, I poured myself a glass of water, sat back down at my table, and opened the transcript of the segment that had already been uploaded online. Reading my own words typed out in black and white was strangely grounding because it reminded me that I had not embellished or reached beyond the truth. I had simply spoken clearly about what I had built, and it was that clarity, not theatrics, that had carried across the screen. The transcript was already circulating, quoted on 2 blogs that like to summarize late-market segments, and I smiled at the thought that while my family was trying to draft the right apology or excuse to slip back into my good graces, strangers were dissecting my comments for strategy, treating them with a seriousness I had never once been afforded in my own living room. Another wave of calls came through just before midnight, and one of my cousins finally left a voicemail that I listened to all the way through, not because I cared particularly about what she had to say, but because I was curious how quickly the narrative would pivot. Her voice was bright and careful, saying the family was thrilled, saying that my parents had cheered when they saw my face on television, saying that my sister had simply misspoken earlier about the dinner, that it was never meant to exclude me but was instead some silly shorthand for something else, and that I should come by tomorrow so we could celebrate properly. I replayed the message once more, this time with the volume low, and I caught the faint sound of chatter and clinking in the background, as if she had stepped into the hallway at the very dinner I had been told not to attend. And that detail told me everything I needed to know about how genuine their sudden enthusiasm was. What they had not understood yet was that I was not waiting for an invitation anymore. The balance had already shifted, and it was not going to tilt back just because they finally noticed the weight of what I had done. I let the voicemail sit unanswered, archived the text into a folder labeled Performance, and set my phone face down again, because I wanted to savor this rare and unfamiliar sensation of holding all the cards without needing to play them. Tomorrow I could choose whether to answer, whether to confront, whether to extend even the smallest olive branch, but tonight I would not. Tonight I wanted them to sit with the silence, to feel what it was like to reach out and find that the person they had dismissed no longer needed them, and that she was not rushing to mend what they had so casually broken. I lay back on the couch, closed my eyes, and felt the calm expand. They could twist themselves into whatever shapes they wanted, but they could not undo the fact that the world had seen me without their filter, and once that happens, the old story does not stick the same way. My sister could craft explanations, my parents could rehearse pride, my cousins could record cheerful invitations, but all of it would bounce against the fact that they had drawn the line of who was successful and who was not, and they had placed me outside it, right up until the very moment the wider world redrew the line without asking their permission. And knowing that, holding that truth without rushing to soften it, was its own form of revenge, quiet but undeniable, and I intended to let them stew in it until I decided what came next. By the time morning light started leaking through the blinds and I finally picked up my phone, the notifications had grown into an avalanche that no sane person could work through in one sitting, and although part of me wanted to clear them just to have a clean screen, another part decided to scroll slowly and let each message remind me of exactly why silence had been the right response through the night. There were voicemails from my mother alternating between pride, confusion, and an almost pleading tone where she insisted she had always supported me but maybe had not used the right words. There were notes from my father that sounded more like a man drafting a press release than speaking to his daughter. And there were a string of texts from my sister that moved from sarcastic congratulations to forced jokes to the kind of brittle apology that is really just a demand to move on without consequences. My cousins, predictably, sprinkled in light-hearted emojis and questions about weather. I would be free that evening for a family toast, as if the mere fact that my name had trended overnight was enough to erase years of dismissal. I let them pile up for an hour longer while I answered the only messages that mattered, the ones from my team and from the legal counsel still smoothing the final signatures. And when everything work-related was handled, I finally opened a new note and began to draft the reply that I knew would sting more than any outburst, because I was not interested in shouting or explaining or replaying every insult. I was interested in drawing a line that would never be blurred again. I wrote that I had seen the calls and that I appreciated the sudden enthusiasm, but that enthusiasm does not erase the fact that only a few hours earlier I was told I was not successful enough to sit at their table. And that if success is the only currency they understand, then I was fine letting my balance speak for itself. I added that I did not need a toast, a dinner, or another round of false apologies, because recognition offered after public validation is not recognition at all, it is opportunism. I told them I was choosing, for the foreseeable future, to limit my energy to people who had stood by me before cameras noticed, and that meant they should not expect me at gatherings or on group calls. Though I wished them well in whatever definitions of success they continued to celebrate. Before I hit send, I sat with the words for a long moment, because part of me knew that what I was doing was not just setting a boundary, but delivering a verdict, one that would change the way family stories were told for years. Yet the longer I stared at it, the more I realized that the verdict had already been handed down the moment my sister typed that message about dinner and pressed send. I was simply refusing to appeal it. With that clarity, I sent the message to the family group, turned my phone back face down, and waited for the inevitable fallout. It did not take long. My mother called within minutes, her voice leaving another voicemail where she cried and said that she had not meant any harm, that she had been proud all along, that she just wanted her daughters to be close, and that families make mistakes they should forgive quickly. My father followed with a text about wanting to sit down privately and talk through misunderstandings, while my sister, in a move that revealed more than she realized, sent a single line that read, "So this is your revenge," as if the only possible explanation for me protecting myself was pettiness. I did not respond to any of it, because there is a kind of power in letting other people fill the silence with their own discomfort. I went about my day, handled more press inquiries than I could have anticipated, confirmed logistics for the fund I had announced, and accepted congratulations from colleagues who did not know the family dynamics and therefore carried no agenda. Each time I looked at my phone, the unanswered messages sat there like little monuments to years of imbalance, finally corrected. And in the evening, when the calls had slowed and the noise began to settle, I allowed myself one small act of deliberate cruelty that felt less like revenge and more like symmetry. I took a photo of my desk with the Bloomberg transcript printed out, the grant fund paperwork stacked neatly beside it, and my phone screen glowing with dozens of unanswered calls, and I saved it to a private folder named My Turn at the Table. I did not post it, I did not send it, I did not share it with a single person, because the point was not to rub it in. The point was to remind myself that I had built something that required no validation from the very people who once defined me as lacking. That night I sat alone again, just as I had 2 nights before with my takeout container, but the silence felt different now, less like exile and more like ownership. And I realized that I had no desire to return to a table where the price of admission was swallowing myself whole. I thought about the next dinner they would hold, the one where my absence would hang heavier than any toast, and I smiled at the certainty that they would not know how to explain it without rewriting history. Let them. I had finally learned that when you stop auditioning for a seat, you get to decide where the table stands, and my table was already full.